Sound doesn't just mysteriously appear. Actually comes from a person. Okay, so we're starting to get back some numbers like we had before COVID. We used to have overfull crowds at every time, but things change, and I guess now there are a lot of them who are satisfied watching it on online. And of course, all the previous presentations are recorded, so you can always go and look at those if you missed any. So there are advantages to having things online, but still, live is somehow better, right? I mean, no matter what, when you go to the theater, it's different from seeing it on TV, no matter how well it's recorded. Kind of, it's just a different atmosphere. All right, let's get going. You know, I knew about Weird Al Yankovic. I knew he does some songs that are parodies and that he's sort of clever, but I never really listened to anything of his until I heard that he had a song called I Want a New Duck. And because of my interest in ducks, I thought I should listen to that one. And I did. And it is kind of clever. Here's some of the lyrics. I want a new duck, one that won't try to bite, one that won't chew a hole in my socks, one that won't quack all night. I want a new duck, one with big webbed feet, one that knows how to wash my car and keep his room real neat. One that won't raid in the icebox, one that will stay in shape, one that's never gonna try to migrate or escape, or I'll tie him up with duct tape. Not too bad, but I understand that it is a parody of some other song that exists, which I've never heard. Anyway, and then he goes on to say that if the duck doesn't come up to these standards, then it's going to end up as duck pate, right? So I thought that this was really interesting, and it was a way to get into a topic that we're going to talk about here, because ducks don't have teeth, right? They don't have any teeth, but we, of course, do. And we pay a lot of attention to this. Now, as you probably know, the toothpaste industry, toothbrush industry is very large because dental cavities is the most prevalent disease in the world by far, right? There are more people who have cavities in the world than who have any other kind of medical condition. And obviously, it can be controlled by proper dental care, by brushing. But there are some environmental consequences here. The toothpaste tube, well, billions and billions of these are purchased every year. Now, we're talking big numbers here. So the question is, where do they end up? Well, where do they? What do you do with your toothpaste tube when you're finished? Put it in the garbage, no? Put it in the garbage. All right, so that means that it ends up in landfills. And landfills are slowly getting filled up. It's not such a huge problem here in Quebec because or in general in Canada. I mean, we have lots of open space, where one can build landfills. But there's the constant concern that whatever is in there, all the remnants, eventually leach out, go into groundwater, eventually get into food, etc. I mean, there's always the concern of where our garbage ends up. So there's a movement now to make toothpaste tubes that are recyclable. And a large percentage of them are now made of high-density polyethylene. And this is absolutely recyclable. But there's something that always needs to be mentioned when we talk about recycling in any kind of context. Just because something is recyclable doesn't mean that it is recycled. Don't get the impression that everything that you put into that blue box eventually gets recycled. There is a constant issue there. You have to separate the different substances. Some of them are worth recycling, some of them are not. So here, although it is true that these are recyclable, you would have to rely on people knowing which are the recyclable toothpaste tubes, that those are to be put in the recycling bin, whereas all the others are put into the garbage. You can't rely on people to do that. So although they get publicity for saying that they're manufacturing recyclable toothpaste tubes, I think the percentage of these that actually ends up being recycled is very, very small. But there's a new approach that is being taken now. And these are the toothpaste tablets. And this is becoming a big market. Hasn't hit here as much as in the US. But you take one of these tablets, put it in your mouth, chew it a little bit. All of a sudden, it will start to foam. And basically, it is toothpaste. It has the same components. But what is missing, of course, is the water. Now, this has a number of benefits because water is heavy. So transportation of toothpastes has a huge impact on the environment. Whereas if you're transporting much smaller toothpaste tablets, you can fit a lot more into a truck. So you're certainly saving on energy, of transport. It is certainly possible to have these be very functional. If we look at the ingredients, sorbitol, that's just a sweetener because people want their toothpaste to taste sweet. Calcium carbonate, clay, and sodium bicarbonate are what we call abrasives. Because basically what you're doing with a toothpaste is rubbing away the dirt that accumulates on your teeth. The analogy would be sandpaper, okay? Except that you want this to be much less abrasive. So you have very finely powdered calcium carbonate. And then you also have a detergent, sodium lauryl sarcosinate. Detergents are substances that form a link between oily materials and water so that they can be rinsed away. So that does the job. Now, something else that you have in here that you actually don't have in most of these toothpaste tablets is fluorinated compound. Now, fluorine, of course, has been well demonstrated to be beneficial for the teeth. But there are a lot of people who, for reasons that are certainly not scientific, worry about fluoride because they've heard that it's a rat poison and that this is being put into our bodies, etc., which is total nonsense. It is rat poison, but not in the doses that are put into toothpaste. So you can make a toothpaste tablet that basically does exactly the same thing that a regular toothpaste does. This one, as I said, has the fluoride in it. Many of them don't. But the ones that don't actually have something called nanohydroxyapatite. Hydroxyapatite is the actual substance of which the enamel in our teeth is made. So what happens here is that the hydroxyapatite actually fills in the little cracks that you have in teeth. This is some new technology, and they have evidence that this works. Now, the hydroxyapatite is put not only in the toothpaste tablets, it can be put into regular toothpaste as well. And we will be seeing more and more of that. But there's another way that you can cut down on the use of toothpaste. Very simple, and you don't even have to buy the tablets. All you have to do is brush with baking soda, sodium bicarbonate. Sodium bicarbonate is an abrasive, and it's a very, very fine powder, as you know, and it will remove the surface stains from teeth. Now, I think this illustration is not realistic. I don't think that you will, get rid of all the yellow ink on the teeth with baking soda, but it is a perfectly acceptable way to brush your teeth. So environmentally speaking, it is beneficial because it means that you're, not transporting water. And so, yeah, baking soda is good. It's also good in the sense that it gets us into a number of interesting stories. And that's what I would like to deal with here today. We're going to go back to the 1800s. And Nicolas Leblanc, a French chemist, who made what at that time was a breakthrough discovery. And as you can see on the etched into the stone, he was basically the discoverer of what we now call soda. All right, so what's the story here? He took sea salt. Sea salt, of course, is sodium chloride. Reacted it with sulfuric acid, which converts it into sodium sulfate, which is a white powder. But then the key discovery was that when he combined the sodium sulfate with limestone, marble, same thing, calcium carbonate, chalk, the same thing, he got sodium carbonate. So what? Well, that sodium carbonate is what we refer to as soda. And this is one of the most important industrial chemicals that exists. It is widely used. It is manufactured today in the world in millions of tons because soda is needed to make glass. Soda combined with silica is how you make glass. Sodium carbonate is essential for making of paper. And sodium carbonate is also very well known as washing soda because when you dissolve it in water, the water becomes alkaline or basic. And alkaline water will dissolve greasy residues very easily. So this discovery by Leblanc back in the 1800s was a huge discovery because it allowed glass, paper, washing soda to be simply manufactured. Before that time, they had no simple way to do this. Glass making was a very involved procedure, but with this discovery, it became much simpler. And then in 1801, a German pharmacologist named Valentine Rose made another discovery. Soda, that is sodium carbonate, when you dissolve it in water, bubble carbon dioxide through the solution, it becomes sodium bicarbonate. Sodium bicarbonate, of course, is what we know as baking soda for reasons that we'll see in a moment. But again, this discovery had great ramifications. Remember that science in those days was really at its initial stages. I mean, today, you just assume baking soda is a simple chemical that you can buy for pennies. Well, that wasn't always the case. But in 1801, he made this rather remarkable discovery. And then in the United States, it was Austin Church and John Dwight who took advantage of this discovery. They realized that when you took baking soda, sodium bicarbonate, and you heated it up, it releases carbon dioxide. This is why it's called baking soda, because when you want to make cakes, cookies, whatever, and you want them to rise, what you do, at least what you did in those initial days, was to mix in some sodium bicarbonate, and when you put this in the oven, it released carbon dioxide gas, and it fluffed it up. But then they also found, Church and Dwight found, that if you added some sour milk to the sodium bicarbonate when it was in the oven, part of the dough, it worked much, much better. Well, the reason for that is that soured milk contains lactic acid. Lactic acid reacts with baking soda, with sodium bicarbonate, to release carbon dioxide gas. That's what makes the thing rise. And this is the reason why to this day, you will see the picture of a cow on baking soda. It all goes back to those days when they realized that soured milk made baking soda work even better. Now we'll hop across the pond to England, and Alfred Bird, a chemist who had a problem with his wife. She was allergic to yeast, so she couldn't eat bread that was risen with yeast. What to do? Well, of course, he knew all about the chemistry that Church and Dwight knew about. It's no big secret that if you take baking soda and you add an acid to it, you get carbon dioxide. But he found that the sour milk could not be relied upon. Sometimes it contained more or less lactic acid. So he wanted to find some sort of an acid that could be mixed with the baking soda in a reliable fashion. And because this was too variable, he searched around for some sort of acid that could be mixed together with the sodium bicarbonate that would produce carbon dioxide in a reproducible fashion. And he came upon cream of tartar. Cream of tartar is tartaric acid in proper chemical language. It is what you see when there's a sediment that forms at the bottom of a wine bottle. That's tartaric acid. It's a byproduct of wine manufacture. So he found that if you mix together tartaric acid, which is a solid material, with baking soda, this mixture would release carbon dioxide in a reproducible fashion. So Alfred Bird is regarded as the inventor of baking powder. So baking powder is not the same as baking soda. Baking soda is just sodium bicarbonate. Baking powder is baking soda mixed with an acid that causes the carbon dioxide to be released. And he started to market this. Alfred Bird's baking powder. This preparation is solely the invention of Alfred Bird, experimental chemist, who discovered the process in 1843 and must not be confounded with numerous spurious initiations which resemble the genuine baking powder in no respect but in name. So you can see that even back then, there was a lot of competition in the industry. So while this was going on in England, in the United States, Eben Norton Horsford, who was a professor at Harvard University, wanted to sell baking powder in the US as well. But it turned out that cream of tartar was very expensive to import into the US. The US didn't have much of a wine industry back then. All of the wine industry was in Europe, and that's where you had to buy your cream of tartar. It was expensive. So he searched around for some other substance that could also be an acid and would release carbon dioxide from baking soda, which would be much more readily available. Well, being a chemist at Harvard, he knew a lot of background information. And they knew that calcium hydrogen phosphate, which is made by cooking up bones in an acid, that this itself can react with baking soda to release carbon dioxide. And this was the first baking powder that was sold in the US. Rumford baking powder. It is actually still around today. And the ratio of the phosphate to the sodium bicarbonate is such that this produces just the right amount of carbon dioxide when it is mixed into a batter. It was quite vigorously advertised, as you can see, Horsford's self-rising bread preparation. So again, anyone who had any problem with yeast could, in fact, use this. And today, of course, we still have baking powder around, and the one that is the most popular is this one, Magic Baking Powder. And the active ingredients in it are the same as was developed back in the 1800s. As you can see, it contains cornstarch. Cornstarch is just a diluent. And monocalcium phosphate, which is the acid, and sodium bicarbonate. And this baking powder is widely used. So the moral of the story is that any sort of acid that is mixed with baking soda will release carbon dioxide, as your children and grandchildren would well know, because at some time in their life, they would have made a baking soda vinegar volcano. Right? This is a classic science fair project. And any kind of acid will release carbon dioxide from baking soda. Now, how did they make things rise before baking soda and before baking powder if they didn't have any yeast available? Well, there was a substance that was around even before baking powder. Today, we call it baker's ammonia. It's really ammonium carbonate. Where did they get this before baking powder was around? From the antlers of deer or stag. When you take those, chop them up, heat it up, you get the release of ammonium carbonate. It's actually still around today. It's known as stag powder or staghorn salt. It's NH42CO3, that's ammonium carbonate. And when you heat it up, you get ammonia, carbon dioxide released. Both ammonia and carbon dioxide are gases, so they will have the effect of plumping up your pastry, your cakes, whatever. And this is still preferred by people who make gingerbread cookies. And they claim that the cookies come out better tasting with this rising agent than with baking powder, because the ammonia actually does impart somewhat of a flavor. So it may well be correct that the gingerbread tastes better than that. But when you heat up ammonium carbonate, you release ammonia. And this was sold in the 1800s as spirit of hartshorn. Hart is a male deer or stag. And why was this sold? Because when you smell ammonia, you will forever remember that you smelled ammonia. It is an absolutely penetrating smell. And this was the essence of smelling salts. Smelling salts were very popular in the 1800s, in the Victorian era, when women would swoon for all kinds of reasons. And then you would just wave this smelling salt under their nose, and they would basically wake up immediately. Ammonia has an extremely, extremely potent smell. Well, that was in the Victorian era. But today, this is still used. Smelling salts. You get it as a powder in a little envelope. You break it open and you smell ammonia. Who uses this? Athletes. That's Alex Ovechkin getting ready on the bench, sniffing smelling salts. And most hockey players now do this just before a game because it wakes you up. It really makes you alert. It's not a pleasant smell, but it sure clears up your sinuses and you won't be falling asleep. Now, it doesn't literally give you any kind of energy, but it certainly takes away any kind of drowsiness that you might have. Well, athletes, of course, will resort to anything in order to try to improve their performance. And as you may know, the hot item these days in the NHL, as is advertised by Connor McDavid, is this BioSteel. Now, of course, when you get some well-known athlete to advertise your product, that translates to a lot of money. I wouldn't even take a guess at how much McDavid is paid to be, a spokesperson for this. I'm sure it's a lot. Now, this is, as you can see, it is promoted as a sports drink. They don't make any kind of extravagant claim on the product itself. But boy, by word of mouth throughout the NHL, the claim is that this gives you energy. There's absolutely no substantiation to that. When we look at the list of ingredients of this thing, there's nothing special there. Now, it does contain sodium, calcium, magnesium. Those are electrolytes. And indeed, when someone is engaged in heavy exercise, you do sweat a lot, and you do need to replace your electrolytes. But that's easily done. I mean, Gatorade and all of those have been around for a long time. This is much more expensive, and they make more elaborate claims. Now, the energy that it's supposed to give you is from the amino acids that are in there. Again, there's absolutely no reason for that. It's a myth. Consuming amino acids does not give you extra energy. But this thing sells extremely well. All the NHL teams use it. But right now, the one that is the most popular, and you probably heard about this because it's been in the news here in the last few weeks, is Prime. Now, this is labeled as an energy drink. And it has gotten a lot of publicity recently. It is so hot as an item in sales that stores can't keep it in stock. It is widely promoted by two athletes, I guess we can call them that. The guy on the left goes by the name of KSI, and the other one is Logan Paul. KSI stands for knowledge, strength, and integrity. I don't know how much knowledge he has. He may have some strength. The integrity is questionable. But they're very interesting people. And, they're not in sort of our life. But if you ask your children or grandchildren, probably your grandchildren, they will know who these critters are because they're all over social media. They're very popular. Logan is a wrestler, a professional wrestler. He's also a boxer, as is the other guy. And they have battled each other. And these were pay-per-view things. And they made an awful lot of money with this. So these are famous people, even though I think most of us will not have heard of them. But in the world of social media, especially among young people, they're very, very well known. They certainly have skeletons in their closet. Logan Paul had a whole controversy when he posted a video from Japan There's a forest in Japan called the suicide forest, where apparently people go to commit suicide. It's a thing in Japan. And he took a video there and he posted the video of dead people. And this caused a great deal of controversy. The other one also has issues. He's clashed with women's groups. You know, he's been accused of all kinds of sexist things. So, but what about this beverage that they are promoting? Where does the energy come from? From one ingredient. That ingredient is caffeine. Now, it's got all kinds of other ingredients because market studies show that if you list more ingredients, people will buy more. They think that, you know, more complex it is, the better it is for you. But it's just water, and then of course it contains caffeine. The question is, how much caffeine does it contain? Well, it depends on where you buy it. In the US, the caffeine content of this thing is about 200 milligrams, which is the equivalent of 2 Red Bulls, which is the equivalent of 2 strong cups of coffee. Now, when you drink 2 strong cups of coffee, one after the other, you feel that, right? Well, similarly, you drink that prime and you certainly have a sensation. Now, caffeine is a stimulant, no question about that. Now, here's the controversy. In Canada, the law says that a beverage cannot contain more than 180 milligrams of caffeine. The prime that was being sold in Canada was imported from the US, and therefore it contained 200 milligrams of caffeine. And this was against Canadian law. And this is the reason that in Canada, it was recalled all over this 20 milligram difference. This is nonsense. But anyway, the thing is now sold in Canada with 180 milligrams. So I guess they produce it here and they have 180 milligrams. So, you know, it was this big controversy over the 20 milligrams of caffeine. Now, it's not that this thing should not be controversial. I think it should, because they are targeting this beverage to very young teenagers. And they are guzzling this thing. You ask any store in Montreal that sells this, and they will tell you that it's the kids that are buying it, and they can't keep it in stock. Now, even 180 milligrams of caffeine is a lot of caffeine. This is not what you want kids pumped up with. So the controversy is legitimate. I mean, not over the difference of 20 milligrams of 180 to 200, but even the 180 should not be given to children. And it's the 12, 13-year-olds who are now going for this. Now, Prime also has another product, and I think it's important to realize that there's a difference here. This is promoted as a hydration drink. This does not contain caffeine. This contains only electrolytes, which is the same thing as you have in Gatorade. So there's nothing wrong with this one. It doesn't have any caffeine. So Prime is really 2 different products. One which is worrisome because of the caffeine content, the other one less so because that's just an electrolyte beverage. But these 2 guys have made an absolute fortune promoting this stuff. And they have managed to get all kinds of teams on board. So for example, Barcelona, which is one of the most expensive or valued teams in the world. This is where Messi originally played. The team is valued at billions of dollars. Now, this beverage has become their official drink. So you can imagine how much that connection is going to sell. They also managed to get themselves connected with Arsenal in England, one of the top teams. So these two guys who have zero education, skeletons in their backgrounds, now are selling this prime thing all over the world and have become multi-millionaires. Now, the fact is that unless you are really into heavy duty exercise, unless you're a marathon runner, you do not need anything other than water in order to hydrate yourself. All of this talk about electrolytes is real when you are a racer in the Tour de France, or if you're running a marathon. But when you are, playing pickup hockey on the weekend, or just going to the gym, you don't need this stuff. And yet, those are the people who are buying it. You look around in a gym, everyone is drinking these electrolyte beverages, energy drinks, totally unnecessary. Water is perfectly good hydrating agent. What kind of water? What about carbonated water? A lot of questions come up about this, about whether or not there's any benefit or detriment in drinking carbonated water. Well, first, let's get rid of one myth that you may have seen on social media about carbonated water being bad for the teeth, because when you dissolve carbon dioxide in water, you get carbonic acid, and any kind of an acid is not good for the teeth. But the fact is that when you're drinking carbonated water, the contact time with the teeth is so small that it's totally irrelevant. You're not going to destroy your teeth by drinking carbonated water. The only downside of carbonated water is that it may make you burp, because of course the gas may come out in an involuntary fashion. But the history of this beverage is fascinating. We go back to 1765, Dr. William Brownrigg, a British physician, who went on a trip to Belgium to visit the town of Spa, S-P-A, which of course is the reason that we call all these health establishments spas. It all comes from the name of this town, which since the Middle Ages was revered as a health resort because of the natural springs there where bubbly water comes out of the ground. And people went there to bathe in the bubbly water, and as you can see, with all kinds of health claims, and they drank the bubbly water in order to get healthy. Now that again is a myth. There's nothing special about carbonated water in terms of health. Anyway, when Brownrigg went to Spa, he wondered what was this emanation from the water. Of course, in those days, they didn't know about chemistry. They knew that some gas was coming out of the water, right? That the bubbles were some gas, but they didn't know what it was. But he collected some of this emanation, as he called it. And he said, this is the same thing that people experience at the Grotto del Cane near Naples in Italy. Now that is a very, very interesting place. The grotto or the cave of the dogs. Why? Because if you go in there with a dog, the dog will die, but you will not. This sits on top of some underground volcano, and the volcano releases carbon dioxide gas. Carbon dioxide gas is heavier than air. You can't see it, it's invisible. But the carbon dioxide sinks to the bottom so that a dog will suffocate from lack of oxygen. Humans, of course, can happily walk through there. This used to be a great tourist attraction. Actually, it still is today. And Brownrigg suggested that the gas coming out of spa water was the same gas that was killing dogs in the Grotto del Cane. Well, this interested Joseph Priestley. Joseph Priestley read Brownrigg's account, which was published in a paper for the Royal Society in England. And he wondered about these emanations. Now, Joseph Priestley is well known in the world of science for his discovery of oxygen and nitrous oxide, which is laughing gas. Well, Priestley happened to live beside a brewery. And of course, a brewery also produces bubbles, right? The bubbles that you see in beer. And he wondered if this was the same emanation as in Spa and as in that cave in Naples. And he figured he was going to test this out. So he took some water and he left it beside one of the vats in the brewery. And the carbon dioxide gas that's produced is heavier than air, so it sank down and dissolved in the water. And as he reported, when he drank that water, he found it to be very sensible and pleasant impregnation. First person to drink soda water. But this was not a practical way to produce soda water, right? By putting a glass of water beside a brewery vat. But Priestley also knew that a Scottish physician, Joseph Black, had shown that when you take limestone and mix it with sulfuric acid, you get something he called fixed air. Well, Priestley figured that this fixed air was the same as in spa water, the same as in his brewery, the same as in the cave of the dogs. And he figured that this was a potentially commercial item. He liked the way the water tasted, and he thought that, this could be promoted. So he came up with the first water carbonation system. And here it is in his lab. Limestone and sulfuric acid were combined in a bottle. That would produce carbon dioxide gas, which then went into what looks like a balloon here. It was the bladder of a pig. And when that would be squeezed, that would produce this pressure to put the carbon dioxide into the water where it would dissolve. And thus was born carbonated water. This was potentially a method that could be scaled up. But Priestley lost interest in this because he went on to work on oxygen and on nitrous oxide. But there's a company today that remembers this, and they are actually marketing Dr. Priestley's fizzy water. Interesting enough, Priestley was not a doctor of any kind. So I don't know why I guess they put that on there because that's more marketable. So anyway, Priestley left this alone, but along came Dr. John Mervyn Knuth, who was a real doctor. He was a medical doctor. And he thought that this business of carbonated water was worth pursuing, but that Priestley's method of making it was too complicated. He invented a device, which is known to this day as the Knuth apparatus, to produce carbonated water. Here is his original drawing. There is the apparatus as it looks. So into the bottom vessel would be placed some chalk, which is calcium carbonate with sulfuric acid. The gas that was produced would come up. This is filled with water. It would carbonate the water. The water would be then pushed up. This would also be filled with carbonated water. And then when they needed some water, tap here would be released. This was a very interesting device. And Knuth claimed that this was far preferable to Priestley's method because the water would not have a urinous taste, as he said, claiming that Priestley's water had a tinge of urine in it from the pig bladder that was used. This really irritated Priestley. And he said that indeed, if Knuth was detecting some urine flavor in the water that he had made with Priestley's apparatus, it was because one of his helpers had taken some liberties and tainted the water. So this was back and forth. But anyway, the Knuth apparatus became very popular. And interestingly enough, when anesthesia was discovered in 1846 in the US, ether anesthesia, in England, the Knuth apparatus was adapted to that. So here's the adapted version, a sponge that would be soaked in ether. And this is just the base of a Knuth apparatus. And as you can see, with an inhaler attached, and people would be put to sleep using the Knuth apparatus. So that was sort of an interesting spin-off. And then the Knuth apparatus in the middle 1800s or so was replaced by the gazogene, a very, very clever device. And for the first time, the siphon head was introduced. So once again, tartaric acid and sodium bicarbonate were mixed in this bulb. Carbon dioxide gas was produced, which bubbled down through a tube into the water here. It would carbonate the water. And when the pressure was released by pushing down the lever, the carbonated water would come out from the spigot. This was a very popular item in the Victorian era. In fact, even Sherlock Holmes had one. In the scandal in Bohemia, which is one of the better Sherlock Holmes stories, the gazogene is mentioned. You can see in the little passage here. And there's the gazogene. And Sherlock Holmes fans will sometimes recreate 221B Baker Street as they, basically from the stories, put in all of the details. And here is one of those. This is a recreation using everything that is mentioned at some time in the stories, from Sherlock Holmes' violin, etc. And you can see the gazogene there. So this was widely used in the Victorian era. Now we come back across the ocean again to this side, and John Matthews. John Matthews is really the father of soda water here in North America. He was the inventor of the soda fountain, which was at first a device, a very elaborately designed device like this. Inside of it was a steel box in which the sodium bicarbonate and an acid, usually sulfuric acid, would be combined. So you'd get the fizzy water and you see the taps where it could be released. He sold these devices around New York. New York was the hotbed of soda water in those days. And his business really took off thanks to St. Patrick's Cathedral. St. Patrick's Cathedral was being built in New York at that time. It's made of marble. So there was a lot of marble chips that were left over from the construction. Marble chips, that's calcium carbonate. That's exactly what he needed for his soda fountain. Calcium carbonate, like sodium bicarbonate, reacts with acid to produce carbon dioxide. So this is what popularized the soda fountains. He built the machine, he supplied them with the chemicals, and people came. Very often, these were in drugstores. We used to have some in Montreal too. You may remember that. Woolworths, for example, Kresge's, they used to have soda fountains. And you'd sit there and you would ask the soda jerk to dispense some of the soda water. Why a soda jerk? Because there was the jerking motion when you open the lever to dispense the water. Matthews is buried in Brooklyn, fittingly, in a very, very, elaborate grave, and it gets a lot of visitors because he is the father of soda water in the States. He is the one who also introduced the siphon bottles. As you can see, he's credited there. Matthews is credited. And these soda bottles, of course, held the carbonated water. They're beautiful bottles. Most of these were made in Czechoslovakia in the late 1800s, and they come in different colors. And they would be delivered by the seltzer men. Any of you remember seltzer men here in Montreal? Yes, we used to have. And at first they were horse-drawn carriages, then of course they were trucks. And they would deliver the seltzer bottles, filled, of course, and leave it on the doorstep. But what really popularized seltzer, believe it or not, were the Three Stooges and the Marx Brothers, because they would use them in their comedy skits all the time. At one time in New York, there were literally thousands of seltzer men who delivered seltzer to homes, mostly in the Jewish communities. Seltzer is also called Jewish champagne. Right? It was the Jews who had brought the idea of carbonated water from Europe. Today, there's only one company in New York that makes seltzer water in siphon bottles. And these are the Brooklyn Seltzer Boys. 3 generations now who produce this. There are a lot of articles that have been written about this. And to this day, they deliver seltzer bottles. It's $50 per case, just not that exorbitant. And these are produced the same way that they were produced 100 years ago. In fact, the carbonator machine that they use is 100 years old. And well, now they don't use bicarbonate and acid. They actually buy the compressed carbon dioxide gas. One of the spin-offs of the seltzer era in the 1800s was the introduction of something called egg cream in New York. How many of you know the egg cream? Yeah. It's a very interesting story. This is unique to New York, more specifically to Brooklyn. You don't find it anywhere else. It's like cheese bagels in Montreal. They don't exist anywhere else. It is very interesting, this New York egg cream, popular in Brooklyn. But what is really quite fascinating about New York egg cream is that it contains no eggs and it contains no cream. So what is it? It is essentially chocolate syrup, milk, and seltzer. This is it. And as I'm told by the experts in egg cream, is that it has to be Fox's original chocolate syrup. So you put that in the bottom of a glass, you add the milk, and then you put the seltzer. And you stir it, and you get this egg cream. I can kind of imagine what it tastes like. I've never tasted it, but next time I go to New York, I'm going to go and see where I can get some egg cream. And I think you still have to go to Brooklyn to get this. But apparently it is still very popular, but it has to be made. It's not something that can be bottled. So they make it for you at the fountain. And so, it might be an interesting thing to take a look at. Yeah.
Can you get it at Walensky's here in Montreal?
You can ask Walensky. I mean, they may be able to make it because they have a seltzer thing. I doubt that they regularly make it. They do make cherry sodas and that.
They will make like an ice cream soda.
When? Well, yeah, without the ice cream. Yeah, the milk, yeah. What? Yes, I mean, you can try it. Yeah. There's all kinds of recipes, online about how to make New York egg cream without the eggs and without the cream. And just exactly how you have to stir it so that it gives you the nice foam. Now, I'll tell you a little personal story here, is that the seltzer bottle kind of has an interesting meaning for me. When I came to Montreal in 1956, we arrived by train from Halifax. That station, you know where that is? In Park Extension, right? It's no longer a train station. I don't know what it is now. It's a Jean Talon. Yeah, it's a Jean Talon. Beside it now, I think is a Provigo. Yeah, but I don't know what this building is now, but it's no longer a train station. Anyway, so we arrived. It was winter. It was around December 20, 1956. First time that I ever saw Christmas trees. First time I ever saw lights, like that. It was really something. So anyway, my aunt picked us up from the train station, and she came to Montreal earlier. She came to Montreal. She was an Auschwitz survivor, and she came to Montreal after the war, sometime around 1949, 1950. Settled in Montreal and opened a restaurant on Stanley Street called Riviera. And she picked us up from the train station. It was in the late afternoon or evening, so we were hungry. So she took us right away to a restaurant. And it's interesting the kind of things you remember, because I know what I ate. I ate Wiener Schnitzel, but the reason it was so interesting to me, I'd never seen anything like that. It hung off the plate. The schnitzel was bigger than the plate. And this, it was, very strange to be here. I mean, of course, I didn't speak the language. Everything looked different. The piles of snow on the street and, all of that. But then when I was being served that Wiener Schnitzel, she reached under the counter and took out a seltzer bottle and gave me a glass of seltzer. And that seemed very comforting because this is something that had been on our table in Hungary all the time. This was a classic thing, the soda water. Very often you would mix it with a little bit of raspberry syrup. That was a classic drink. So I remember that seemed comforting because, it was sort of something I was familiar with. And then to tap it all off, she made some palacinta, which is a type of Hungarian crepe. And you make that with seltzer water. It's flour and water and egg, but in order to give it some fluffiness, you spray in some soda water. So to this day, every time I see one of these siphon bottles, this is what I think of. So it's interesting, how memory works. But just to finish off here, you can't talk about carbon dioxide as we'll be talking without mentioning the greenhouse effect. Because carbon dioxide in seltzer water is fine. Carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, not so good. At least an excess of it, not so good. Obviously, carbon dioxide is essential for life because it is what makes photosynthesis possible. But too much carbon dioxide locks in heat into the atmosphere, and that results in all those things that we are seeing. So let me ask you this. If you have a problem with your plumbing, you call a plumber, right? You have a problem with your electricity, you call an electrician. You have a problem with vaccines or a question about vaccines. Who do you call? You call an expert, like Paul Offit, who you see on CNN all the time. You do not call Robert Kennedy, a stupid ingrate who knows nothing about vaccines and yet is pontificating on it. If you have a question about quantum entanglement, whatever that may be, you ask John Clauser, who got the Nobel Prize in Physics for quantum entanglement. But you don't go and ask him about the greenhouse effect and climate change, even though he pontificates on it. Just recently, he talked about it at a conference, saying that this is all a hoax, that climate change isn't real. He doesn't believe that there's a climate crisis. But just because you don't believe something doesn't mean it's not happening. It's happening. Carbon dioxide levels are increasing. We see what is happening in the Arctic and Antarctic. The ice is melting. We're seeing all kinds of strange weather patterns. We're seeing the fires. This is all real. Now, the anti-climate change people have doubled down and have said that Nobel Prize winning scientist says climate crisis is a hoax to depopulate the planet. He never said that. He did say he doesn't believe in climate change, but he never said this. That is just totally wrong. But this is what some of these, climate change deniers do. They clutch at every straw. Now, if you really want to know about climate change, you ask people who are in the know. You ask ones who won the Nobel Prize, not in quantum entanglement, but in the relevant field, which is climate change. And this is, an interesting story because it highlights that you have to know to whom to listen. You want to listen to experts in a field. But just because someone has won a Nobel Prize in one field does not mean that they have expertise in another field. This is something that has been termed the Nobel disease. When someone becomes famous because they've been awarded the Nobel Prize, which is the highest prize, of course, you can get in science, they get asked all kinds of questions, and they begin to feel that they should answer them. And they can just go batty. For example, Luc Montagnier, who won the Nobel Prize for discovery of the HIV, the virus, right, went on to talk about areas in which he had absolutely no expertise. He came up with some ridiculous notion that DNA could emit radio waves that could be transmitted through water to another solution. I mean, total nonsense. And then we had William Shockley. William Shockley, who won the 56th Nobel Prize in Physics for inventing the transistor. He shared that with John Bartlett, who's the only double Nobel Prize winner in physics. Anyway, certainly that was well-deserved because, obviously the transistor is what made possible all of our modern electronic gizmos. Well, believe it or not, after he won the Nobel Prize, Shockley became a eugenist. He even wanted to found a sperm depository for Nobel Prize winners. He believed that the intelligence of the general population was decreasing, which is possible. And he was going to improve on that by establishing a sperm bank where only people who were Nobel Prize winners or at high IQs would be allowed to donate. And this, of course, the sperm would be used to enhance the brilliance of the population. He believed that blacks were inferior mentally. But when he was called a white supremacist, he said that he's not because he thinks that Jews are superior and they're white. But then, of course, he was told that that is just as much a racist comment as anything else. So anyway, Shockley, a Nobel Prize winner, deservedly so, made these absolutely shocking statements. about eugenics. So, it's important to whom you listen and what the topic is and whether or not they have an expertise in that area. Anyway, if you want to read some more about, all of these things, we have a lot of stuff on our website, and you can check it out. You can sign up for a weekly newsletter there and get all kinds of interesting information. All right, that's it. Questions, comments? Yeah. Yes, so the soda stream is essentially a carbonation machine. But you buy the cylinder, which has compressed carbon dioxide in it, and it gives you very nice bubbles. It will not be as strong as what you get in one of these siphon bottles, because there they can saturate it with carbon dioxide, and those siphon bottles are thick glass, so they can stand up to a lot of pressure. And if you listen to the Brooklyn boys, they will tell you that you can judge the quality of soda water by the bite it has on the back of your throat. And if you want good quality, it really has to bite into the back of your throat. Soda streams, of course, is a very interesting story, politically, because the Soda Stream factory was built in the West Bank, and it employed almost 100% Palestinians. And of course, they were getting Israeli-like wages, which is not usual in the West Bank. But then, because of all of the divest movements, people were being told, don't buy Soda Stream because of the Israeli exploitation. So what was the result of that? They dismantled the factory that employed hundreds of Palestinians, moved it into proper Israel. All those Palestinians lost their jobs. That was the result of the divest movement, which of course is ridiculous in the first place. So anyway, Soda Stream now is still is an Israeli company. It's manufactured in Israel. It was not originally an Israeli company. Soda Stream originally was a British company. Israeli company bought it. What?
It's owned by Pepsi.
Now, yes, it was sold to Pepsi. That's right. Yeah, right. But it's still produced there. Still. Yeah.
Probably became famous because of their ice cream soda. We used to always still do it. We put a little bit of ice cream into soda and mix the two together. That became very popular.
Yeah, the ice cream soda, sure. I mean, the soda fountain sold ice cream soda. Yeah.
Is there an essential difference between the word seltzer and club soda?
Yes. Club soda is so called because it was first produced in Ireland at the behest of a club. I forget what the name of the club was, but it was a men's club in Ireland that wanted their own brand of soda. So that's why it was called club soda. And the difference between club soda and seltzer is that club soda is defined as having a certain mineral content. It must have a certain amount of sodium, magnesium, and calcium, where seltzer is just any water that you've carbonated.
So the carbonation should be stronger in club soda than seltzer?
Not necessarily, no. The mineral content will be higher in club soda, but not the carbonation. It just depends on the equipment that you have. Like when they use the equipment that the Brooklyn boys use, you get very, very strong carbonation. And also the beauty of the siphon bottle is that you don't lose the carbonation, right? Whereas when you buy soda in one of these plastic bottles, as soon as you open it, it will start to lose the carbonation. So the siphon bottles for real soda lovers are still the thing, because
Unless you buy it in a can.
what?
Unless you buy it in a can and bring the whole thing.
Yes, well, if you buy it in the can and drink it right away, yeah, of course. Those, the bottles, the seltzer, the siphon bottles are now quite valuable because they're not made by anyone. So that seltzer company in New York is constantly looking to buy it from people who may have some. And the beautiful bottles, they come in all colors.
They become collector's items and they sell the bottles, they keep the bottles and that.
You have to give back the bottle.
you have to keep that.
They're, of course, they're refillable.
So if you want to keep one as a souvenir, it doesn't have to belong to you technically when you're buying it from them. It's like-
No, you have to give back as many bottles as they brought you. Okay, all right, we'll see you next time.